Hey everybody, it's John from JB's Total Gaming, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Dicetown. So Dicetown is a game that plays 2 to 5 players. The suggested time is about 30 to 45 minutes, and it can go pretty quickly once you learn the game. It's a pretty simple game, kind of a family weight game, where you're going to be taking these cool dice. If you take a look at them, they have different, faces that could be cards, basically, and you're going to be trying to making the best poker hands. It has kind of Wild West theme. If you've ever played Yahtzee where you roll the dice and then you keep one or maybe more, that's kind of the basics of the game. Now we're going to take a quick look at the board and a real quick overview of the rules, and we're going to come back and talk about what's good about the game, what's maybe not so good about the game, and what is going to be up to you whether you're going to like it or not, and hopefully try to help you decide if this is a game that you might enjoy. Now, a round of Dicetown starts simply enough. Everyone is going to take 5 of their dice in this kind of container and roll up the dice and go ahead and roll them. And then they're going to take a look at what they have, but they don't really want to show everyone else what they have. Now I'm just going to go ahead and lift this up so it's easier to see. And each time you roll, you're going to normally keep at least 1 die, and you'd be able to keep it for free. Now you can actually keep more or less dice by paying $1. So you start the game with $8, and there's ways to get more. So for example, this might be great to start off with this 2 pair and hope that I can roll this one later. I could keep 3 additional dice and keep 4 of them if I want to pay $3. I can keep 0 if I pay 1, or any variance of 1, I can pay a certain amount to do that. And, well, in general, you're going to keep doing that, and then if that's what you want to keep, you'd set that to the side and then re-roll this die, and then see what you get, and so on and so forth. Now, you might want to just use 1 die at a time and try to get the best hand possible, but the key to this is also, whenever a player is done rolling dice, then everyone else gets 1 more round and has to keep what they want to get. So you can see there are definitely strategies for trying to get certain things, but also, if somebody goes quick, you may not have the time to do that. And you can also see what other players are doing and what they're going for. Maybe you're going for a certain thing and another player already has you beat with the dice they have set aside. And then after everyone has finished rolling their dice and getting their final results of their hands, then we'll go to the board and we'll see what happened. So after everyone has their 5 dice, we're going to look at all the different places on the board and see who wins everything. So for example, we'll start with whoever has the most 9s, and whoever has the most 9s will get to take 1 gold piece for every 9 that they have in their hand. Now if there's a tie, that is decided by the sheriff. Whoever's the oldest player starts as the sheriff, and that can change hands during the game, and we'll see how that works. But you can bribe the sheriff as well. But you don't want to remember, these gold pieces might change hands later in the game as well. So you get more money by going to the bank, and whoever has the most 10s will get the money in the bank. You start with $3 there, and then whenever you pay money during a round, it goes down here into the stagecoach, and then after you're done dealing with the bank and someone gets the money, then the money would transfer into there and be in their next round. Now if we go to the general store, the person with the most jacks gets to look at a number of cards equal to the jacks they had, and then keep 1 of those cards. So if they had 2, they'd get to look at 2 cards. And in general, these cards break down to 2 different things. Either points at the end of the game, and each card is going to show you when you can play the card, and this is at the end, and this is worth 1 point. These vary in points, and there's one that's worth as many as 8 points. Or then there's cards that you can play at a certain time. So for example, this one, as you can see, you can play when you show your dice, and then it allows you to keep more dice without having to pay for it. There we go, a little more zoomed in. And there's all kinds of these different cards that do different things, but in general they're either going to be points or give you a special ability. Now the saloon is pretty interesting. It works kind of like the general store, where instead of taking cards off the deck, you get to look at another player's card. So you can choose a player and look at any cards in their hand. Now interestingly enough, there are 2 types of cards that might be in their hand. The general store cards or property cards, and we'll get to how those work in a second. But you can choose which cards you want to look at, but you won't know what they are unless you remember specifically. Maybe the person only had 1 card and you saw it before, maybe they even stole it from you. Now you can only ever steal 1 card, but you can look at more if you have more queens. And then we get to the sheriff. Whoever has the most kings becomes the sheriff. And again, the sheriff always decides every tie, so if the sheriff has a tie for the most kings, is probably going to keep it. Now at the town hall, the player with the best hand is the one who is going to win here. And if we see on these cards, they show the available hands from a pair to 2 pair all the way up to 5 of a kind. Now because there are only 6 sides of the dice and only 1 suit for each type of card, obviously it's not a true setup of poker, but it's pretty simple to keep track, and even if you're playing with players that aren't familiar with poker, it's not really difficult to explain which hands are going to be better. And when you win with the best hand, you get to take the bottom-most property card. Now what's interesting about here is that these range from 1 to 5, but you can potentially get up to 3 of these cards. Basically every ace you have in your hand, if you have the best hand, it's going to allow you to take one more. So if you have the best hand and at least 2 aces, you can take all 3 of these cards. And you get to see at the start of each round what these are going to be, so potentially how important going after the best hand that round may be. So what happens if you don't get anything? You get to go to Dr. Bad Luck, and depending on what you have in your hand, you can choose certain things. So you can protect property cards. So if you have a 9 or a 10, you can basically put 2 cards face up and say these no one else can touch, and you can't steal these from me anymore, which can be very nice, especially if you have like 4 or 5 value property cards. With a queen or a jack, you can draw the top card off of the property, or the general store deck, excuse me, and just keep that card. You only get one, you can only look at one. And again, if you have all of these in your hand, you get to basically choose one of these, the one you think will be most valuable. So with a king, you can take $2 from every player that has $2 available to give, or with an ace, 1 gold piece. Now at the end of the game, being the sheriff is worth 5 points, these cards are worth points, the general store cards are going to be worth points, gold nuggets are going to be worth 1 point apiece, and every $2. So $2 and 1 gold nugget is worth the same number of points at the end of the game. The game ends when either property has run out or the gold nuggets have run out, and that's pretty much everything you need to know about the game. In general, Dr. Bad Luck isn't really going to be used very often in a 2 or 3 player game, but in a 5 player game it can be used fairly often, sometimes even 2 players in the same round having to use it. So there you go, there's pretty much everything you need to know to play the game. Now, this is a pretty simple game, so let's talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it, and what is going to be up to you. Now, first things first, one of the best things about the game is this. There's just something nice about that sound and that feel of taking that cup and slamming it down. Now, along with that, overall the game has very nice components. The money isn't really paper money, it's kind of thin or whatever, but it's still decent quality and not just paper. The dice are really nice, they're engraved, they're not going to wear out very easily, and and the cups are nice, and the board is pretty small and simple, but it's nice, and the rulebook is pretty short and laid out pretty well. There is a lot of text as far as talking about what each building does, but overall, I mean, this is the whole rule book. So I'd have to say the components are really nice, and that satisfaction of slamming down that cup, multiple times every round is really fun. Some other positives about the game, in my opinion, are the way that the mechanisms work. So being able to take 0 to 5 of the dice every time is a really interesting thing where you can see what other people are doing and whether or not you should go for it. And having to have money to do that, just that mechanism of seeing what other people are doing, how many dice to keep, when to spend a lot of money, what to go after, and all of that is a pretty nice mechanism in the game. Now, another thing I really like is Dr. Bad Luck. Now, with less players, you're not going to have that come up all that often, or at all, but the idea that you can get something, and not only that, but you have choices to what you want to get if you get nothing else in the round, is something I really, really like. Now, let's talk about some things that maybe are actually bad about the game. Now, I thought about this, and the one big thing that I think I can point out is there's a lack of variability. The game's set up the same way every time, and when you play the game, if you play it multiple times, there's a lot of games that are going to play out very differently if you play the game multiple times, whereas this isn't really going to do that. Players may get more lucky or whatever, but there isn't necessarily like a different story arc going through different games. The game is kind of constrained in the way it plays, and you're not going to have huge variances and stories to tell at the end of the game. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm trying to think of things that I can say are fairly objectively bad, and that's the one thing I can probably think of. Now, what about the things that are going to be up to you? So I'm going to try to point out some things that maybe you can decide whether you think they're positive or negative. So there's a huge amount of luck in this game. Any game that's entirely based around dice, that luck really comes into play. Now, you do have cool things with those cards, and those cards are something I do like. You have that moment where, I'm going to take the sheriff, and you get a card. Nope, no, you're not. I have a card that prevents you from doing that. Those are kind of neat moments. But at the end of the day, even with a little mitigation with the cards and the special powers, you still could just roll really badly and never seem to get what you want. And, people can win the game based on luck alone. There is definitely some skill in the game, but there's a high luck factor. And that's something that a lot of people might like because it might allow them to play with younger kids pretty easily, but, real gamers who want to dissect the game and come up with the best possible plan may not like that. Another thing I think that's a little iffy is the sheriff. Now, to think about the sheriff deciding every tie, especially with a lot of players, the sheriff is going to make a lot of decisions, and sometimes that can be really fun and people trying to bribe you, but sometimes it can almost get a little annoying. The first time I played this with a 5-player game, and even little things like, if two people have to go to Dr. Badluck, who goes first? That can be an important decision, and it can be a little vindictive. And so not only the sheriff having to make decisions and maybe going against someone just because to be annoying, and the fact that you can steal from other players. So both the sheriff having to make those decisions and then the ability to steal cards and money and gold from whatever, they could maybe feel a little mean to some people who don't like those sort of interactions in games. And with less players, you're going to not have so many choices who to take from. That might even get more annoying, but you're also not going to have the sheriff having to make so many decisions. So overall, the game can be a little mean. There is a huge luck factor, but it has really nice components and a lot of satisfaction of slamming it down and some really neat mechanisms. And really, the only negative I can think of is the only objective negative I can think of is a lack of variability. So is this game going to be right for you? Well, this game retails for around $45. Now, you may be able to find it for less than that on certain places, but overall, if you're looking for a family weight game and you like the theme of the Wild West, you like the theme of poker, you like that idea of chucking those dice, then overall it's a pretty solid game. Now, there are a lot of games, though, around that kind of, somewhat simpler family weight, around a quicker time or whatever, with some luck factor, so you're going to have a lot of choices in there, and this isn't one that I'm going to come out and say this is a must-buy. It's going to come down to if you're down with the luck factor, if you really like the idea of chucking the dice, and you're okay with, the sheriff having to make those decisions and maybe just a little bit of meanness on top of that. And if all that sounds cool to you, then it could be a pretty good pick. However, if you're someone who really wants to be into the game itself and figuring out the game and picking it apart and don't like those luck factors, don't like the idea that you can steal from opponents and all of that, then it may not be the game for you. I do like that it plays from a wide range from 2 to 5. I wouldn't really suggest it with 2, though. I mean, with 3 I think it's alright. I think 4 may even be the sweet spot for this, and I think 5 is alright too. The game, even though it's a short game, can go on a little bit long with 5, especially because the sheriff is making those decisions too, but it's still a pretty short game even with 5. So a decent amount of variability as far as the luck, but not a lot of variability as far as the gameplay. But if the themes and the luck factor and all that sounds like fun, if the idea you can play it with different ages, and maybe not with the youngest of kids, but with when kids are getting a little bit more advanced in their gaming, then this is something that, again, because of the luck factor, pretty much anyone can play. So overall, it's a game that I enjoy pretty well. It's a game that's been out for a good number of years now that people seem to enjoy, and while I can't give it my highest recommendation and say everyone needs to go out and play it, if those things that could go either way sound good in your book, then it's one that I can recommend. Alright, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.